Here.
Brooks.
Here.
Ogalla. Here. Summers. Here. Singer. Moran. Rice. Harris.
Here.
Trainier. Benefield.
Here.
Fritz. Gould.
Here.
Militello. Here. Dallage.
Here.
Frizzalone.
Here.
Winfrey. Here. Harper. Here. Staley Ferry. Here. Dallinger. Yes. Markham.
Here.
Hart. Here. Tumanello. Weigel.
Here.
Ferry.
Here.
Carlitis.
Here.
And Mustis.
Okay, next will be the pledge. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to listen to the pledge. Lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have no minutes to approve. Is there any old business anyone would like to bring up? Okay, under new business, we have a presentation by a solar developer. And I will have Samantha from Solid Waste introduce these folks in a second. If I can just give a little background. You know, one of the new ways of generating power is now these, what I'm going to call smaller solar facilities. We have 10 acres, 15 acres, 20, 30 acres. Not so much like the, you know, the thousands of acres that you'll see out west in the desert, right? And it has caused some work on our part, and because we have not developed as of yet in our land use, in our building codes and land use, really these kind of rules for solar. And there are issues. Probably one of the primary issues are screening, how it affects folks, how it's maintained, and of course one of the biggest is when they decommission. How do you do this? Who's going to be responsible? Should we require bonds to be put up for decommissioning? So we're sure that it's an eyesore in the future or a danger in the future. What could be the effects of solar fields and so forth. Samantha, if you want to introduce our guests here today, our speakers. Which is Cypress, but you can maybe give a little background. Any other little background you'd like to give why we're trying to make a presentation here and pretty much bring everybody up to speed. Feel free to give a little more background if you like, okay?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, County Board members. My name is Sam Bleemer. I am the Energy and Conservation Specialist in the Land Use Department. And today we've asked two solar developers, Borrego Solar and Cypress Creek Renewables, to provide educational presentations to you all around the solar market in Illinois. This all changed in December 2016 when a piece of legislation was passed in the state called the Future Energy Jobs Act, more commonly known as FEJA, that created incentives that now make it economically attractive for solar developers to deploy solar throughout the state of Illinois in a variety of capacities. We also have interest for these projects throughout our county. So what these presentations are intended to do for you all today is to create context around some of the technical questions, as Mr. Speaker mentioned, screening, decommissioning, those sorts of things. So with that said, I want to introduce Sarah Wilkos of Borrego Solar to start the presentations.
Okay.
Hi everybody. Thanks Sam. Thanks Mr. Speaker, members of the board. Thanks for having me here to speak today. As Sam mentioned, my name is Sarah Wilkos. I work for Borrego Solar. I'm the Director of Policy and Business Development for our Midwest operations. We are a company that was founded in 1980 in Borrego Springs, California. And we've been operating ever since and have expanded from California across the country. Our niche market is doing rooftop solar projects for commercial and industrial customers. as well as small-scale community solar projects and small utility-scale projects. We've also done a handful of solar projects on landfills in the Northeast. We are interested in developing in Illinois, and that's why they hired me, as well as some of our team. And in particular, we have some interest in Will County. I did bring with me some members of my team that I do want to introduce very briefly, because in the future, if we do come before you, you will see a lot more of their faces than you will of mine. So in the back, we have our Director of Development, Alex Farkas, our Senior Developer, Justin Hart, and our two civil engineering consultants, Matt Walsh and Margaret Bloom. So in the future, you will see their faces. So I've been asked to speak today a little bit about why solar is so popular in Illinois right now. Prior to coming to Borrego, I spent the better part of a decade working for an environmental group based out of Chicago called the Environmental Law and Policy Center. And in my role there, I was the co-legislative director and spent so many hours on this policy. In fact, you can probably blame me for this coming to fruition because I wrote most of the renewable portion of the Future Energy Jobs Act. So I've been asked to speak a little bit about what the Future Energy Jobs Act entails and why, and what kind of projects you're going to see here. And I'll speak a little bit about what we look at as a developer when we're looking to build projects. So the Future Energy Jobs Act included a provision called the Renewable Portfolio Standard. And that is the standard that really is driving the development of renewable energy in Illinois. That standard has actually been in place since 2007. When it first passed, it was really focused on wind development, and you probably, if you've driven down I-55 towards Springfield, have seen a number of wind farms that were developed as a result of that project, of that policy. From 2007 until now, it really was not focused on solar. And so a couple of years ago, we started to revise the standard to make sure that solar was a larger portion of the mix. What passed in 2016, in December 2016, did not actually change the overall goal of the policy, which is that our electric utilities get 25% of their electricity from renewable sources. But it did change, within that goal, what types of projects are built. So as you can see from this overview, we still have the goal of getting 25% of our power from renewable sources by 2025. 75% of that goal every single year is supposed to come from wind and solar projects. And most importantly, now, under this law, there is priority given for the development of new projects, and in particular, new solar projects. New solar is defined as something that has gone online after June 1, 2017. So anything that was built in the past doesn't qualify. And so ultimately what is going to happen is at the bottom there, the impact. We're going to see somewhere between 1,600 and 2,000 megawatts of solar developed by 2025. And the vast majority of that will be developed in the next 4 years, less in the later years. So what type of solar will be developed? Well, most people are probably familiar with rooftop solar, and there will be a significant amount of rooftop solar developed as a part of this policy. And you can see from the pie chart that I have on the upper right hand that 13% of the solar that's built will be what we call residential behind the meter. So that is small rooftop systems on residential homes. Another 13% will be commercial and industrial systems. So like the IKEA system that just went on here in Joliet. Another 13% will be those types of systems. 40% will be larger projects called utility scale projects. Utility scale projects do not have a single customer that necessarily takes the power. It's more like a wholesale power plant, like the coal plants or the nuke plants that are around the state. And those projects don't have to be a specific size, but they tend to be much larger because you get economies of scale when you're developing. And I will go into a little bit more detail about all these different types on the next slide. But I want to point out that a new type of solar is going to be developed here that is very exciting. That's called community solar. What community solar is probably the majority of the interest that you're seeing here in Will County. They are smaller projects, but they are not located behind any one customer's meter. Instead, they're built remotely, generally on land, and multiple customers get the benefit from the project. So it allows people that cannot put solar on the rooftop, whether it's a renter or somebody that lives in a condo building or somebody whose roof is just too wonky to fit solar, to participate in the solar market. And those projects will have anywhere from 3 to several hundred different customers that own essentially a portion of the project. And that is the really exciting part of this change in law, because now everybody in the state of Illinois can participate in the solar market, not just people that have a great south-facing roof. So another part of this law is brownfield solar. That might also be of interest to Will County. Brownfield solar is solar projects that are built essentially on brownfields. And brownfields covers a swath of different types of projects. It includes landfills, it includes Superfund sites, it includes other types of sites that have been cleaned up. And we will see a couple of those projects built as a result of this law. In addition to all the solar that's being built, you will see new wind projects developed, and there is a significant amount of money in this process for job training, which was a very important piece, as well as a separate pot of money that will focus on building solar projects for low-income residents, whether that's public housing or just affordable housing folks. I'm not going to focus on that particular part today because quite honestly, the rules on that are still being worked out, but I just wanted to note that that is a very significant part of this whole law. So, okay, so this just goes into a little bit more detail about the different types that I just talked about. And as you can see from the third column, I guess, is the amount of development that you'll see as a result of all of these projects. Going from the bottom up, those utility scale projects can be larger. They can be, because you get economies of scale, we're likely to see that larger projects. And if there's 1,000 megawatts of solar that is going to be developed for utility scale solar, if those projects are in the 100 megawatt range, you're only going to see 10 of them across the entire state. Now these projects are different from community solar and rooftop solar in one main reason. And that is that they have to bid into a RFP to be able to win an incentive. So the state puts out an RFP, the utility scale solar developer has to say, we have a project, here's our price, and the lowest price wins. So it's not a guarantee that these projects will be built. The state has already put out one RFP for these types of projects, and one project won. It will be built in the southern part of the state, and it will probably be about 100 megawatts. So if you subtract that off of that total, in future RFPs, the state's going to ask for about 900 megawatts of utility scale solar. They could be anywhere in the state, so you may not see any of them in this area, or you might see one. And these projects are anywhere from, maybe 20 acres to several hundred acres. And when you're building this type of project, you really do need land that is, considerably a considerably large parcel of land, close to good interconnection. And so, it remains to be seen where all of those will be built. The community solar is also, that's the one that I said where multiple customers can receive the benefit. Most of those are going to be built on land. Some of them could be on rooftop, but many of them will be built on land. The law limits the size of these projects to 2 megawatts. That's about 10 to 12 acres. And and it also splits up that total amount, that 325 megawatts, by ComEd territory and Ameren territory. So of those 325 megawatts of community solar that are likely to be built by 2025, most of the projects probably will be the maximum size of 2 megawatts, so that comes out to about 160 community solar projects. 70% of those are going to be in the ComEd territory, so that's about a little over 100 projects. Of the 30 counties that are in the ComEd territory, that means every county, if it was spread evenly, would see about 3 to 4 community solar projects. Now, it's not going to be spread evenly. It could be, many projects could be built in Will and none in Kankakee. It all depends. But I just wanted to give you a sense of the impact. It's not going to be thousands and thousands of projects. There's going to be a couple of hundred. They're all going to be somewhere in the 10 to 20 acre range. Why these projects differ is that they have a different way of getting the incentive from the state. They have to, it's a set incentive that's set by the state agency called the Illinois Power Agency, and you apply on a first come, first served basis. We expect that incentive program to open up in summer of 2018, and to be able to participate in that program, the community solar developer has to have the permit from the county, has to have an agreement from ComEd or Ameren that they can interconnect their project, and they also have to have their lease worked out with the homeowner. So that's why you're seeing a lot of projects now. Once the incentive program, once the incentive program opens up, project developers like myself will apply for the program. If we're accepted, then we will build, and we have 18 months to build once we're accepted. So projects in this size won't actually be built until at least late 2018, maybe 2019. So as a developer, what we're looking for when we develop projects is, again, land. Most of it is agricultural land because that is, you don't have to do a lot of work. You're not removing trees or buildings or what have you. So we need a willing landowner. And when we talk to a landowner, we always request that they go get a lawyer because we want to make sure that they are protected. So we need a willing landowner. We need a willing landowner that has land that is near interconnection. And that actually is the key part there. Interconnecting to the utility, which is a requirement, is only good in some places. Will County happens to have a lot of infrastructure, which is why you're seeing a lot of interest in this county, but it's not everywhere, and in some places, there's not enough space on the lines to support these types of projects. So when we look at land, we then go to ComEd or Ameren and say, could we even interconnect here? And they tell us if we can't, or if it's very costly to interconnect, we're not going to do that project. And third, when we're looking at these sites, we're looking for a very clear permitting process. We will do whatever the county wants, but if it's unclear or seems overly onerous, we will go to a different spot that looks easier to get permitted. So those are the types of projects that we're going to see. On the rooftop side, you will see more applications for rooftop solar throughout the state. It's a little less time sensitive because, as I mentioned, for community solar, you have to get all those things in place before you can enter the incentive program, and so there's a lot of focus from developers on that particular part. So let me stop there, maybe just go to the next slide. And this is just an illustration of how community solar works. It's not a very good illustration, admittedly, but so, you'd have a larger project and various customers would take a part of the community solar project. So, and it can be residential customers, it can be commercial customers, municipal buildings and schools can also be customers of the community solar project. So maybe I'll stop and take questions, because that was a lot of information.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Mike?
So can you go back to the slide on the community? More back. So under the community solar, we're talking about 10 to 12 acre sites, but on the end there it says they can co-locate, so they could have 40 or 50 acres, 5 sites together, right?
No. So the current rule that was draft rules on this whole program were released by the Illinois Power Agency earlier this year. And they're still being developed, but what the draft rule says right now is that you cannot co-locate community solar projects. Now, they may revise that a little bit so that maybe 2 projects could be co-located, but I can say with a high degree of certainty that we will not be able to co-locate multiple projects so that you have a 100-acre site that is a community solar project. So at max, my best estimate is that if we are allowed to co-locate 2 projects, you would see at max a 20 to 24 acre project. Yes.
Good.
I have a question on the incentives. If the incentives weren't there, would it be profitable for the company to set up these solar farms?
No. We are here because of this policy.
If you don't get incentives, you wouldn't even be bothering doing this.
Correct.
So it's all based on the government giving free money.
It's a competitive program, and I would say, my argument would be that we've done this for every source of energy, and not this specific type of program, but we've subsidized every type of energy. We paid for the nuke plants when they first opened, the coal plants, and so usually government does get involved to help newer technologies get going. And the point of this, and why it is time limited, is that the incentives are available now, but you're bringing the industry to a point where eventually down the road it does not need an incentive and can stand on its own 2 feet.
I think from a local perspective, local zoning authority, that is perhaps one of the issues we wrestle with, and that is once the incentive program is over, and if it's still not profitable without subsidies, you know, that these facilities would get abandoned.
That's an excellent question.
And of course, we need some insurance of decommissioning and so forth. So it is something that it appears to, what's in front, there's been a front of the land use committee to this point. That's one of the issues they're wrestling with, of how do we address decommissioning.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, and something that I forgot to mention is that the incentive means that you have to deliver the energy from the project for 15 years. And if you do not deliver the energy from the project for 15 years, you are subject to significant financial penalties. So I cannot build a project and abandon it tomorrow. I cannot do it. And the projects that have been built before in the state of Illinois, including the one that's in LaSalle County, it has a 20-year contract. So moreover, we don't actually make money unless the projects continue to operate. And the panels themselves, even though the contract with the state is for 15 years, the panels themselves are warranted for 25 years. And the longer they last, the more profitable it is for us. So abandonment is not something that's going to happen with these projects.
To follow up on that, what happens if you go out of business?
Well, then the projects would be sold to another company. We can't go out of business without selling our assets. So the project would be sold to another company, and they would operate it for the term of the contract. If we go bankrupt, we have to sell our assets. So.
That doesn't mean somebody's going to operate it. They can buy the hardware.
Well, they have to though, as the contract with the state requires that it's operating. We've been around since 1980. We also my company does operation and maintenance on systems for other companies. And like I said, the only way to make money is if you actually are producing power on this. The incentive does not cover the cost of the system. It does not. The power that we sell into the grid is required to cover our revenue requirements. And therefore, we have to keep it operating in order for us to pay off our loans, in order for us to make money on the system. So it will continue to operate.
So as into the residential starts to pick up speed, and they are doing the rooftops, but yet you have the community and the brownfields and the larger ones that people aren't pulling off the grid because they're creating their own energy source. What is the research and data that you've been seeing on that? How are you dealing with that from a business standpoint?
So even if somebody doesn't subscribe to the community solar project, we still get a payment for some of the power, so it's not completely without revenue, so it will continue to operate. But what we have seen is that community solar is particularly both important and also popular with people, because if you saw the sports slide, so only about a quarter of the homes in all of the United States are suitable for solar, and I think in the Chicagoland area it's even less because we have such old building stock here. So many people can't put solar on their roof, but there is a lot of interest. And moreover, this program is designed so that if you participate, you're actually going to save money by being a community solar subscriber or rooftop solar subscriber. So there's that added bill savings portion of it as well. So I don't have any concern that we'll find people that want to participate in this. This type of program has been successfully implemented in Minnesota, Massachusetts, New York, California, and it's wildly popular. In fact, community solar is the most popular type of solar that's growing across the nation.
And as people go, just to follow up from a residential standpoint, do the residents get a return on their investment and incentives and that kind of thing?
Yeah, yep.
And how does that?
Yeah, it gets a little complicated, but essentially you're getting, for whatever your panels produce, you get a credit on your bill, a monetary credit on your bill that offsets your electric bill. Because it's not behind your meter, it can't offset your electric use, but it offsets your electric bill.
And if it goes to the negative where you're actually pulling more than you're using, are you getting credits and or dollars for that?
So just for community solar, you get a monetary credit for every hour of power that your portion of the community solar project creates. You only get an energy credit. So your bill as an electric customer includes energy, distribution, and you're not getting a credit for that distribution piece. But let's say your community solar project produces 1,000 kilowatt hours and you get $60 worth of credit for that. You can use that $60, but then your house pulls in 1,000 kilowatt hours and you're paying, you also are paying the distribution cost on that. You can use that $60 to offset your overall electric bill. So you're saving money, but it's unlikely that you'll ever be able to offset your entire bill.
Or your entire cost of putting it on, you have to
Correct.
redo your roof and all that other kind of stuff.
Well, it depends on who.
Depends on the,
Yes.
depends on your house.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you maybe to help us here a little
Yeah.
bit. You've been in this business a long time.
Yeah.
Your company's been in it since the 80s.
Yeah.
And so you'll probably have seen every scenario,
Yeah.
every problem,
Yeah.
every solution to this point that there has been. So let me ask you, as a county, because kind of initially looking at this and still working on its ordinance and dealing with different issues of decommissioning, screening, some things that are state law, you have to have a fence or a certain height of razor wire, Nobody likes razor wire next to them, but it's just required by state statute. What have been some of the challenges you've seen for perhaps the local zoning jurisdictions and some solutions that maybe your industry has offered, whether it be on setbacks or screening?
Yeah.
What seems to be the big issues?
So setbacks are definitely an issue, and I think that's a legacy of wind. When wind came into the state, a lot of you guys dealt with wind, a lot of your peers. And wind, you can obviously see from a much further distance than you can solar. Furthermore, it's got, it's taller, it's got shadow and whatnot. And if it fell, it would.
Knocks down a few birds.
Yeah, exactly. Knocks down a few. So I think a lot of local governments are taking what they've done with wind and kind of setting it onto solar, and there are a lot of differences. Setbacks, we don't need to be as far back. You really cannot see the solar until you're right up on top of it, and I actually would recommend for anybody that's interested in seeing kind of a larger ground mount system, there's one in LaSalle County near Streeter called Grand Ridge. It's been around since 2012. You cannot see it until you're right on top of it. So setbacks, I think, are one thing. We wouldn't recommend more than a 100-foot setback at any time, and really it could probably be less than that. And we would think that it could be less than that. On the decommissioning, I understand that there is concern there, but the contracts that we have require us to maintain operation. And if we don't, we're going to have a significant financial penalty. So our leases also with the landowner generally talk about decommissioning. They want their land to go back to the way it was after we built. And we have to take everything off as part of our leases as well. So I would say on the decommissioning bond, I understand that that is a concern. We have seen with wind and also in other places that maybe requiring a decommissioning bond further into the term of the solar system is more appropriate because we're not going to take it down in at least 15 years.
So a decommissioning bond is something that is customary.
It is not. It's not universal. Because it is in a lot of leases and across the nation, not just in Illinois. It's not something that is always required, and many counties have said, well, you already have it in your lease, like you're going to violate your lease with the landowner if you don't decommission the system. So, that's a landowner, it's a private kind of discussion amongst them. But some counties have gone a little bit further and said, well, maybe we do want to do something, but at that point we would recommend that the bond, if you require the bond on day one, it's just lost money to us. And furthermore, it's going to make projects in that county more expensive to build, and so developers are going to be less likely to go to the county. We're going to go to counties where, because we're all competing against each other, like I said, there's land, there's interconnection, and there's a very clear permitting process. And if additional costs are put on the project, whether it's decommissioning or setbacks that require us to re-engineer the system, it makes it less attractive to go to those particular counties. And I will say, this type of project, community solar, as well as utility scale solar, are paying property taxes. Rooftop solar is exempt from property taxes, but these systems will pay property taxes.
So that kind of brings me to one of the debates we've had a little bit at our land And that is, on decommissioning, ultimately, the landowner is responsible. He owns the land.
Right.
Regardless of the leasee is, the leaseor is responsible. So it's really something that we would want to see. So I guess what I'm asking is it unusual for a zoning authority to say to the landowner, we want to see that you have some provision in your lease to decommission?
We have had to provide a redacted copy of our lease to county planning boards before, and that is not, it's not always required, but it's not unusual. And we're happy to provide that to show, to prove your point, that we are going to take the system out at the end of its term. Yeah.
Any other? Go ahead, Mark.
When you sell to another company, does every agreement go with the equipment and everything else?
Yes.
Okay.
And some systems will never be sold, you know, they will remain in the same hands, and some systems will be sold. It's real estate, you know, but it depends.
Have you got just one more question?
Yeah.
How many decommissions have you had to deal with within your company since this has been going on?
Well, that's an excellent question. I don't have an answer to that. I will have to get back to you on it because we've been around for a long time, but I don't know off the top of my head.
And it'd be nice to know the numbers
Yeah.
and why.
Yeah, okay.
Because as we take a look at putting the policy together, it would help
Yeah.
us to see what the end game was.
Yeah. Yeah, and so, I mean, I will tell you, the number will be very low because
sure.
the panels are warranted for 25 years, but they often last even longer. So, you know, rooftops, my parents have had solar on the roof since 1979. So, and it's still operating. So, you know, it could last 40, 50 years. It produces less over that time each year, but there's nothing that says that it has to go off at year 20, year 25, what have you.
Right, and I'm more, and there might be other reasons that something might need to be decommissioned.
Right.
And I don't know what those might be.
Yeah, okay.
And, you know, it might not just be the panels going down, it might be the business going out of business or things being sold. So just helping us see
Sure.
that picture
Sure.
would help us in being able to look forward into the future because
Sure.
we don't have it.
Sure, I'll provide Sam some information that perhaps she can share with you.
Along that line, you know, one of my thoughts and concerns have been is that we all know technologies can change so drastically overnight. And let's take the solar industry. I don't know if there has been big advances in solar type of technology, maybe some more efficient. But what if all of a sudden you came up with hey, I got a new panel and it'll generate 400 times the power that's burned?
That would be
Wouldn't that be
amazing.
great?
And we would only need.
Of course, I'm thinking that.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm thinking, you know, so could there be, so what if there were such a change or in technologies that even though these older technologies are good for 20, the older technologies are good for 25 years, it just does not make sense to keep it.
Well, I mean,
Do you see this replacement?
yeah, I mean, we replace
Same
panels just
place?
because, you know, panels sometimes stop working, so we have to replace a panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's much easier for us to replace the panels on an existing system than have to go out and, you know, build a whole new system. So, you know, I think technology certainly is advancing. I think Scott from Cypress Creek is going to speak to technology here in just a minute, but, so I don't know that it's going to advance quite as quickly as your example, but it definitely, the panels are not difficult to switch out. And so I think that would be our first option. Yeah, right.
Thank
I'm
you,
gonna get the
Rick.
hug.
Thank you. Oh, Mark has another question. Mark?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to ask this before. The wind farm generating fans produce enough electricity approximately to power 700 residential homes. Do you have any figure like that other than 2 megawatts, because that doesn't transfer to me?
Yeah. So and this is off the top of my head, but I think it depends on how much electricity you're using, but in terms of an average Illinois home, every megawatt is about 120 homes to 140 homes. So a 2 megawatt project is double that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Very informative.
Yep.
Sam, are you going to introduce our next speaker, or is he just going to come down and, oh, there you are.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm now going to introduce Mr. Scott Novak of Cypress Creek Renewables, and he's going to continue the conversation. Sarah really covered a lot of the legislative components and why all of this is happening now, and Scott's going to go into some of the more technical details about the systems themselves. Scott?
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I also want to thank Sarah, who gave a wonderful presentation on some of the intricacies in FIJA, and she mentioned that she can be blamed for it. I'd like to take the opposite approach. And thank you for your work on this bill. Really important. So as Sam gets these slides up, I'll take just a quick second to introduce myself. So my name is Scott Novak. I'm with Cypress Creek Renewables. We are a national solar farm developer. We were founded in 2014, so we're a little bit newer, but our founding members have, each of them, over 20 years experience developing solar farms kind of all over the country. So just to give an idea of scale, I don't want to make this Cypress-centric, but just so you guys know who we are and that we have some kind of backing to us. We have over 130 operating solar farms right now across the states. And we have a development pipeline that's about 4 times larger than that. In terms of power, that equates to between 4 and 5 gigawatts of solar in our development pipeline. In terms of what we manage, there's about 1 gigawatt right now. And I won't touch up on this too much, but this just kind of gives an example of the different states where we have operational plants at the moment, in addition to our development pipeline. You can see we've had a lot of activity down in the southeast. North Carolina happened to be a state that put some policies in place early on to really enable solar development. They were kind of one of the first states. And really what's happening, and Sarah did a great job explaining what happened here in Illinois, but what's happening is one by one, states are catching on. And you can move to the next slide. And one more. So I think it's important to highlight, kind of take a step back and look at the big picture. The solar industry is very healthy and growing at a really impressive pace. As of last year, there were over 260,000 solar workers, and that number is growing by about 25% per year. Last year, 1 in 50 new jobs was in the solar industry, which greatly outpaces employment growth in other industries. And about 10% of those jobs go to veterans, which is a great little fact. And a lot of what's driving that is just costs. Costs are coming down. In the last 7 years, so since 2010, costs of the different components that you find on a solar farm have come down 70%. In the last 5 years, it's over 60%. So really what's happening is a few different groups of people. Governments are taking notice, like Bruce Rauner and the state of Illinois, and developers, of course, are taking notice too. And solar farms are becoming just more economically feasible. And just real quick, there's a couple different types of solar, right? And I just want to be clear, we're not talking about solar thermal, which is kind of an intricate array of mirrors that redirect sunlight to a central location. We're talking about PV or photovoltaics, which has the opposite goal. That's to soak in as much sunlight as possible and turn that sunlight into electricity. And when you're talking about PV, there's really 2 different types. I'm sorry, let me back up. When we're talking about ground-mounted solar photovoltaics, which is what we're here to discuss, there's really 2 different types that you find. There's a fixed tilt. So those are panels that are mounted at 30 and 45 degree angle that are facing south, that don't move throughout the day. And then there's something we call single axis tracking. And these are panels that actually super slowly rotate throughout the day to capture more yield or more sun. So in the morning they're facing they're facing east. And then midday they're kind of flat. So the sun's overhead and it's kind of soaking in the sun overhead. And then in the afternoon they're facing west. This type of decision is something that's made, as far as what we would be installing in each individual solar farm, is made during the engineering phase, which generally is a little bit later in the process, post-zoning. But what we're looking at and the way we're modeling everything is it looks like in Illinois, we're going to be speccing all of our projects with this tracking, single-axis tracking systems. I thought it'd be helpful just to show a couple of pictures. I like this one a lot. It gives a really good idea of the scale that we're talking about. Here's a Cypress employee who's just average height. And you can see at the top of that panel, that's only a foot or so above him. So generally, we think about height in terms of like under 10 feet, really 7, 8 feet tops. 12 feet is the highest you'd ever see it, and that is more of a safe kind of constraint number, not a height that you would really see out in the field.
Hey, Scott, can we go back to the last, or maybe this is the picture, never mind, go ahead.
Well,
Yeah, I think you're going to get to what I was going to ask.
but you actually raise a good point, though. If anybody has any questions at any time, please feel free to interrupt, raise your hand, or whatever. Here's a shot underneath an array of solar panels, and it just kind of shows how the panels are wired together. So in an array, each panel is wired to each other, and then there's a combiner box at the end of each array. And then from there, the wiring goes underground to a central component in the solar farm, which is the inverter transformer equipment. So while this wiring is above ground, it's underneath the panel and tucked neatly away, and the rest, for the most part, is all underground wiring.
Can I get this photo up there?
Yeah.
Can you also explain, first, one of the questions that was to come up is vegetation or what's underneath the solar panels.
Yeah.
You can't cut the
Yeah.
Obviously, you can't cut, you can't go run the lawnmower.
Yeah, there's actually some equipment that's there's some equipment, like the field in general. There's actually mowing equipment that's evolving, technologically advancing. So there's more and more equipment that can get part of the way under there. Of course, not from this side, right? You'd have to get under from the other side. But actually, before I answer the vegetation, I think I wanted to highlight one other thing in this photo and also the photo before it. So as you can see, the panels themselves are not sitting on concrete at all. They're sitting on steel posts. So other than the inverter transformer equipment, which I mentioned earlier, and we'll get to a picture of that later, there's no concrete on site. As far as vegetation, we slow growth local seed mix is the idea with routine mowing. Now, a lot of times you'll hear about pollinator-friendly planting. So that could be a little kind of bonus side effect in situations where the community wants it, or it's something that, if somebody has a prerogative for that. So what I mean by pollinator-friendly plantings are, this might be, pollinator-friendly, like for butterflies and bees, and therefore we want to come in and mow that area, right? And I know the solar farm, Grand Ridge Solar in LaSalle that Sarah referenced, now, there's two sides to the pollinator-friendly coin, right? Because on one, to the untrained eye, and when you're looking from a distance, it can look like weeds. Whereas if it's low-growth ground cover that gets mowed, that kind of gives a more clean look. So there's kind of both sides, but there's kind of both options, I would say. But it's important to note that the spacing between the arrays, between 12 and 20 feet, essentially, is enough room for mowers to get through.
So let me ask you this. On the outside of having something in a local ordinance or a special condition, which we tend to do here, is there maintenance agreements with the leaseor on how you're going to maintain the site? Do you generally have that in those leases?
Yeah, I believe our lease does contain language about how we maintain the site. And we also maintain generally on both sides of the fence. So in a situation where we're not leasing the entire parcel, let's say, which definitely happens if somebody has a 40-acre parcel and we're leasing 20 of it, that might mean 20 acres are going to be farmed still, which is an ideal scenario. Or maybe there's a 50-foot or 30-foot setback before the fence line that we would also maintain in that situation. Also, very often, the condition of our special use or conditional use permit that's granted by the jurisdiction, an operations and maintenance agreement will be required as part of those conditions.
All right, I just wanted to touch on that now since you had those photos.
Great.
So
I think we have another question here.
Yeah,
Mike has a question.
Since you have the photos up there,
Yeah.
two questions. One, you said there's no concrete, so how far do you have to drive these things down into the ground? And I'm assuming this is the static condition. When you have the sunflower condition, what do you use for your structure on that?
Same, so just steel posts in any scenario. Between 6 and 8 feet is the average depth, and the variables include soil conditions. Just another image that kind of, oh, Judy.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, and so, just for everyone to know, so because you're drilling posts into the ground 6 to 8 feet, it could hit a field tile. What do you
Right.
do for looking into that?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of information on the slide coming up, and I'm happy to address that now, because that's a really important topic that not just in Illinois, but in the Great Lakes states, and we have experience developing in Minnesota and Indiana, Missouri as well. And each region, even each county in Illinois has kind of different, different drainage, different soil types, different systems of drain tiles. So what we're committed to doing is identifying where the field tiles are to the best of our ability before starting. And that's through a drain tile survey. So with the drain tile survey, the goal is to, as accurately as possible, understand what the network of tiles looks like underneath the soil. And then when we're designing our system, we can take into account where the tiles are. Should we break one during construction, which could easily happen, right? There's lateral feeder tiles that might be harder to locate. We're committed to repairing and replacing, the portion that has been damaged. So the goal, and I'm glad you asked this because I do want to step back. I mean, our goal in installing ground mount solar systems is to disturb the earth as little as possible. Both in the interest of being a good steward for the land, also as an obligation to our landlord, who we are grateful to, who's allowing us to use his or her land, but also contractually with that landlord. We have to return the land to its existing condition prior to us being there. So on a lot of levels, that just kind of dictates how responsibly we're going to develop this property. So we don't want flooding. We certainly don't want our neighbors flooding. So we're going to take every approach necessary to ensure that the site is acting the same way, if not better, in terms of drainage than it was before we were there. So I mentioned this equipment a little bit earlier. This is the inverter and transformer. This is the only equipment on the site that sits on a concrete pad. On a 2 megawatt solar farm, which is that community scale, and it's kind of going to be the most common size. And we tend to be a little bit more conservative with the amount of land that we would say would be required for a 2 megawatt. For us, it's between 15 and 20 acres. But I think it's, if you pulled a bunch of solar developers, I think it would be in that range of 10 to 20 acres. But on a site that size, 2 megawatts, you'd see just one of these concrete pads. And to give an idea of size, we're talking about a 1-car garage. So on a 20-acre site, 1-car garage worth of concrete that's supporting this equipment. Go ahead to the next. Wanted to illustrate just a few photos of the construction process. On the right, we have a site that has all of its racking installed. And on the left, there's a few pile drivers in the frame that are in the process of driving piles or putting the posts into the ground. I like these photos that kind of just give an idea of what a solar farm looks like through various stages.
How long does it take a 15-acre site? How long is the pile drive?
Pile drive, I was just talking with our construction team about the pile driving process on a 200-acre site, which is about 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. So I would assume it would be a little bit less for a smaller site, but you'd have less people on, so probably not a whole lot less than that. But important to note that we work within whatever the posted construction hours are, and we are certainly not driving piles or doing any work at night at all, just daytime. So this is kind of the slide I talked about that I mentioned to Judy. So we wanted to really explore the impact of ag land because it's important. Ag land is certainly important everywhere in the world. It's really important in Illinois, of course. And so we wanted to look at the effects of what happens when you let a site like fallow take it offline for a period of time, for even decades. And a soil scientist who's also a farmer, really well qualified to look into this, issued a report that basically said there's a number of really benefits to letting this land. You know, if you think about it, the land's not being tilled, it's not eroding off each spring and each year. So it's being kind of capped and just left and line followed. So organic matter, tilth, and fertility is expected to improve, as I'm sure a lot of people can imagine in that scenario. I mentioned the field tile, so I won't get into that again. And I also talked about the limited concrete. So that translates into really not altering the permeable nature of the land at all. A few photos of our closest solar farms, right? Because FEJA was just passed and solar is more attractive in Illinois now. We personally, as a company, don't have any operating solar farms in the state. We haven't begun construction yet. That's really dictated by the FEJA timeline, or the IPA's timeline, I should say. But we do have a few solar farms in western Indiana. These are in the Terre Haute kind of area of the state. These are 5 megawatt, so 45-acre sites. This is the same site, just 2 different perspectives. On the left, we have a drone shot, kind of gives a bird's eye. And on the right is a ground level shot. And similar to what Sarah mentioned, when you're on the ground, when you're looking out, you know, this is what you're seeing. Yes.
So I know, I think that for the proposed site Creek, that they're talking about what you're doing, 7-foot fence. And did they want to put slats in that fence?
I'm going to, I've been advised by the state's attorney that we do not discuss or ask any questions on anything that may be pending
Okay.
here in Will County.
All right.
And of course, the presenters have also been advised not to talk about any of their specific projects. So you have to ask pretty general questions. Are you good there, Mary?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So you can ask general questions about screening or fencing. We cannot talk about anything that may be involved.
So screening from other properties in the area.
Right.
Is it typically that you put a chain link fence? What's a typical type of screening that you guys use?
So our typical is six foot fence with a 1 foot, so 3 strands of barbed wire on top. Now, we've heard a lot of
Is that
feedback.
part of the state electrical code though?
Yes, but not the barbed wire portion.
Okay.
Not the barbed wire portion. The barbed wire is an extra, safety mechanism to keep, or to attempt to keep deer out. And by the way, not because there's a safety concern for them, but because we just don't want deer and large animals running around our site.
And the other reason I brought up, because there is some that's the state code, electrical code, of certain kind of screening.
Yeah.
The minimum type of screening.
So our minimum is 7 feet. And if we're going to remove the barbed wire, which we like to, we have a goal of blending into the community and being the best neighbor we can be. So if we hear feedback from neighbors that says we don't want to look at barbed wire, we feel like it looks like a prison, and I've heard this and I understand that, then our answer is where we can and where allowable by the code, we'll have a fence without barbed wire. We've also heard people say, people who hate privacy slats, people who hate, the wind, I forgot what they're called, the storm shield that you see at tennis courts that fade in the sun. So, I mean, there's a lot of local opinions to kind of take into account, but we try to do all that, and that's why we host things like community meetings that you know about, to try to appease and blend in as best we can to local customers.
The other thing I might point out is this. Regardless of what a solar operator might do, it's the county that can set the, once we meet the minimum standards of the electric code, the county can make a determination of what kind of screening would be in the ordinance, the minimum part of the ordinance, which they would have to follow. And if there was, because of community, maybe the location needs some additional screening, that can always be a special condition. And the only reason I mention this is we don't leave it up to operators. We kind of make that determination as a community standard.
Right, and that's, in your county.
As long as it's within reason,
Right, and your county's doing a fantastic job.
Yeah. There are some things that people out there are just totally unreasonable. say anything?
Do you typically lease all of these sites, or do you buy some of these? Are you going to, if you're going to be around for another 100 years, why wouldn't you buy this?
So we do both. We do buy, certain times we do buy. I'd say the majority of our sites are leased. You know, all of the costs associated with these solar power plants are upfront.
Now, I'm going to stop you again, Scott. I know Mary's going to come down here. She's come down here once and talked to me once already.
All because it's
this is this. Listen, we got to talk in terms of the industry. If you say the industry buys and leases and buys properties.
Absolutely, and the industry does buy it. And
Okay.
the industry,
It's a financial decision.
yes. Oftentimes, I mean, there's long due diligence periods, right, on these lease or purchase options. And so sometimes those make more sense on a lease side, rather than somebody waiting potentially 18 months to know the fate of their site on a sale. Might be more palatable on a lease. That's an industry, I think I speak for the industry when I say that. I do, before I get to you, I want to comment on the speaker's last comment about screening, because I think it's an important one. And first of all, I want to take a second to say that Will County is doing a very thorough and fantastic job of really understanding what the regulations should be, so that the rules are clearly spelled out for folks like us when we come into this county, and we understand what our projected costs are and what the implications, how much land we need before we make development decisions. So that's really helpful. On screening, we wholeheartedly believe that there are certain circumstances where screening is required and necessary. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, and I think we as the industry, because we understand that neighbors are used to existing condition and status quo. And so when there's a residence across the street or even abutting a property line that we're proposing, that the developer is proposing solar panels, there's an expectation there that there should be screening, and we totally understand that. So we'll propose evergreen trees. We can do 2 rows, 1. I mean, there's various different ways to do that. We could potentially, if there's enough, if there's enough room in the land, if there's enough land area, then we can, the developer can increase the setback, all things like this. But in scenarios where there isn't a residential property, or really any property that's next to the site, then planting trees that nobody are going to see is kind of a different story. Let's
move on. Let's move on from screening. Oh, they should come down.
Another picture?
We've had enough fun.
Just another picture of one of our Indiana farms to give you an idea of what the Midwestern landscape looks like with solar. Go ahead. Number of benefits to local solar. Sarah touched up on a few of them, right? If somebody wants to participate in this clean technology kind of future, but doesn't want to invest on rooftop panels or doesn't have a roof that's appropriate for it, this is a way to participate. And there's no, there's little hassle or commitment or upfront investment. And solar farms are quiet, completely quiet. They're virtually self-sufficient. I mean, they're monitored remotely. They're low profile, like I mentioned, below 10 feet. And then there's this really big portion, which is economic growth and property tax revenue. Right now, ag land is taxed like ag land, extremely low assessed value, low amount of tax revenue as a result. The way that solar farms are going to be taxed are going to bump that up significantly, which is really a nice opportunity for schools and roads and emergency services to gain more revenue without any additional costs, right? So there's no additional students in the classrooms. There's no additional need for emergency services. There's no traffic. There's no use anything for the roads. So go ahead. I'm going to try to advance based on time here. But I also want to highlight there's no safety risks associated with ground-mounted or any sort of solar PV systems. And that's because they're designed and spec'd by licensed engineers, and then all solar developers go through the traditional permitting process that's required for any development. So national electrical codes are met, national and local electrical codes, building codes, electrical codes, and they're designed drawings and gone through all the proper processes. And then from a safety perspective, Mr. Speaker had mentioned that there's a code, the National Electrical Code ensures that there's perimeter fencing, and that is absolutely true, and that's a secure fence. And then vegetation is maintained. And the vegetative maintenance really accounts for the most site visits per year. Because they're kind of self-sufficient, developers are just not out on the site a lot. The estimate is between 5 and 9 times. So you can imagine the lack of traffic impact, way less than, say, even a single-family home as a result of these solar farms. Just to touch up on a few more items that often get talked about when discussing solar PV farms. So I already mentioned traffic, and I mentioned sound too, but I want to reiterate. These things are quiet. The biggest source of sound comes from that inverter and transformer equipment, and that's basically, there's a cooling fan in the inverter. So when the solar plant is generating power in the day, the fan is running to cool that equipment down. But even if we were right next to it, we wouldn't have to raise our voice to have a discussion. And further, and more importantly, beyond 150 feet, you can't hear it. There's no audible noise at all. And that equipment is always interior to the site, nowhere near the property lines. So at the property lines, you're not hearing anything. And then glare. A common misconception is that these are going to blind birds, planes, and even humans. And the fact of the matter is there's an anti-reflective coating, and the goal of these panels is to soak in as much sun as possible. Each solar farm, PV farm, has to go through an FAA glare analysis to ensure that it's safe for planes, and none have ever failed. So there's no impact on glare from a human scale level or from a plane level as well. And we talked about safety earlier. There's no equipment on a solar farm that is unsafe. Just big picture. I'm actually going to move through in the interest of time here. 2 main types of solar panels. And the first is crystalline silicon, which is basically made of sand. And right now, that the majority of projects are being installed with that type of technology. Thin film is an alternative. Their construction is very similar in that, in the end, you've got a solid state technology material. So this is glass that acts almost like tempered glass does, in that if it were to break, catastrophic event, there's a tornado, a tree rams into it, it won't shatter. There's no possibility that any shards of glass could get into the ground or into the air or anywhere at all. So there's no concerns with toxic materials or leaching of any kind. Again, I'm talking about this stuff because I get these questions. So generally it's glass with an aluminum foil, is how to think about these panels. And the highlight here is there's no fluids, no chemicals, no leaks. I mentioned the noise. In the bottom right, there's a circle there. That's around that inverter and transformer equipment. That circle represents a 150-foot radius. And beyond that circle, you can't hear the noise the inverter is creating. And so this is illustrated to show that nobody would ever be in proximity, anywhere near proximity, to hear the noise of that inverter is making. So that is, I think, did you edit the, did you pare it down a little bit too? Oh, okay. All right. We must have stuck through, but I think that's good.
Is there any other question for Scott, Mark? Go ahead.
Once construction begins on a solar farm, how long does it take to build one? I know it depends on the size, but typically.
20 weeks. 20 weeks is
and how many people does that employ?
So that depends. On a 2 megawatt site, I don't want to misspeak because I usually have my numbers if we talk about a specific project, which of course I don't want to do.
No. That's why I said.
Or Mary will.
That's why I said.
Yeah. So I can tell you like a 20 megawatt site has in the neighborhood of 44 full-time equivalent construction jobs. Local construction jobs is the estimate there. And the goal is to use local labor whenever possible. You know, sometimes the trades just aren't available. I think in Will County, we won't run into that issue. all trades are readily available here. The idea is to keep labor as local as possible. There's also an ongoing component of vegetative maintenance and also just routine inspections, operations, and maintenance that there's recurring, while there's no permanent jobs like on site, there's recurring revenue that's spent locally on things like that. Oh, I also want to just quickly mention, I have a civil engineering expert consultant with me, as well as a national, actually international appraiser. So if you guys have any questions that kind of gear towards that, I have kind of a team with me that'll be happy to answer.
So is there any other questions? Okay, Scott, thank you very much. Sam, I don't know if you want to come down and kind of wrap it up, or maybe make some comments about what our county's been doing through our green efforts here in Will County. Or Dean, Dean, you know what, Dean? Come on down, you just stand next to Sarah. And Sam, you know.
Mr. Speaker and County Board members, I really want to say thank you for your willingness to attend and be open to the discussion around this technology. I'm really glad that we were able to have an open forum for which to discuss the topic of solar. I know it can be hard for all of us to come together, but I think that given the current climate with solar in Illinois, that this was really necessary going forward as decisions approach the board.
Okay, Steen, I always like to give you the business, but you know, just a few words. Let me say this: I ask Dean pretty frequently about programs in solar for myself individually. I've never quite been able to get over that hump. I like to do solar at my home, but the cost versus the return, you know, there's that part of that business guy that just don't let me do it. But you said there are programs, and the reason I'm mentioning this is hopefully we got enough general information, a line of information. What we did talk about here, though, which may for another day, because we are really getting tight on time, is that there are programs that come through the county for individuals who type solar and so forth. And maybe another day, we can talk about some of the programs that are available to our Will County residents through our conference. Go ahead.
Well, I do want to say we won that Soul Smart Award, which was at NACO in July, but now we have gold. Okay, so we went from bronze to gold. So we just got that plaque the other day, and that's really to help residential. That was for our building, to give people all the assets, the website, the tools to put that on the roof.
So you got a gold plaque, we'll give you a presentation, you know, like next month.
Sure, okay.
I
got to prove this one.
Well, we do it this month, if you do it next Thursday. Chuck wants to put it on under our proclamations, and let's point out to people, and that'll give you a few minutes to talk about some of our programs for our residents.
Sounds good, yeah.
All right?
Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds great. Thanks.
Any questions for Dean or Sam? Thank you very much for helping with this.
Thank you.
You know, I got one other piece of information, business. It's not on your agenda, only on mine, you know. And it deals with transportation. We hear a lot about it. We did our transportation plan, and it gave us a lot of information. And certainly, one of the main concerns we have here in Will County and beyond, because it goes into Grundy County, it goes into other counties, it has other effects, and that's I-80. And then I hear estimates of, well, how would you do it? You know, you're talking about $1 billion project. You know, the state only puts $1.2 billion in. You think you're going to get all the money, even if it is a multi-year project. So you do look at what are potential or possible solutions. And sometimes it's out of the box a little bit. Sometimes maybe reaching a little bit. But at least not why have it. At least not. There's no reason not to have a discussion or look at potential solutions. I have had discussions, and when we were doing our freight study, I did bring up to our consultant, well, you know, the tollway system has to be a component of solutions potential, and they agree. And so now, I would like to request of the toll authority to do a feasibility study. Now, we're not talking about a feasibility study, it's just a study, to take a look at, is it possible to run a toll system along I-80, both for trucks and other types of vehicles? Maybe even run it from, I don't know what the study would be, maybe take it even from, I'd say take it 57 past 55, or whatever they think would be feasible. Tie it into 355 somehow. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing this out there. So I would like to bring forward a resolution requesting the toll authority to do a feasibility study on, is it possible for the toll system to look at that I-80 corridor for potential development? It could be, not, can't happen, no way, we're not interested. At least let's make the ask for them to do a study to see if there is another solution for I-80. That I-80, I'm going to say not even I-80, the I-80 corridor to increase capacity, both for trucks, you know, vehicles. I'm actually thinking more trucks, but I don't want to get that specific. But I'm going to bring this up in executive committee about moving forward a resolution for that request. So I wanted everybody to be aware of it or make comment on it now, if you like. Like I said, I'm just kind of throwing this out, but I'm going to try to move this, try to move this forward.
You know, we had just had our economic development committee meeting yesterday. One of the things that we talked about bringing to the economic development was the freight study to talk about what that impact. And I had an opportunity to have to drive I-80 east yesterday from Joliet out toward Frankfurt. And one of the things that popped into my head was, after driving around the country as much as I do and travel for work, there are a number of places that have toll lanes off to the side of freeways. And I was thinking it would be interesting to be able to see if we could put, I mean, we built a whole log bridge, and having the trucks dump into I-80, which way are they going to go, and how are they going to go, and how is that going to impact traffic? So I would love to see a study done that would see the feasibility of something like this, because I think that 2 lanes on I-80 with all the trucks that we would put in off Hoboken it would be dangerous. And so being able to see a way to be able to take care of that, I think would be really appropriate.
And I can keep in mind, this is just asking them to look at it, this is stuff.
Yeah.
Did someone has this easy to do over here? No. Okay, did anybody else like to have a comment? Yes, sir?
I take Interstate 80 7 days a week. There's
Me too.
Right next to my house, so I wouldn't want to toll by my house. But the study though, my question is with the study, is that something that the county board would have to pay for?
No.
No.
I'm asking the tollway authority to do it. Right. I'm asking them to do the study and pay for it.
They would pay, okay.
I'm asking them to, if they would do it and pay for it.
All right, okay. Okay, thank you.
And the other reason I've kind of thought about this, because the toll system is connected to 80 already.
Right.
Well, it goes all the way down to, even though it's out of Will County, but the toll system is also connected to I-80
At 294.
At 294. So it's connected to the east also. So there's some symmetry there where they're already connected to that system.
Okay.
So, you know, it is like, I'm thinking, and if they were willing to do the study, even if they weren't willing to say, well, the expansion I'm thinking there's a lot of good information that we would get and IDOT would get from the study on the I-80 corridor, and where there might, I think there could be some useful information.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, because they're gonna come back with more traffic information than even our study did. Because they're gonna look at lane by lane, times a day, all of those kinds of things to see if it's possible that it would pay for itself with the toll. So we can get a lot of information.
Yeah, I think we can get a lot of good information. And I want to say something just in general. If you look around the country, and this state will be no different. When you look at what the future of new roads, new lane miles are going to be, it's probably going to be on toll systems or some kind of private system. The state's lucky they have enough money to maintain the roads they have. And I learned one thing about 355, and that is I've never had anyone come to me and say, I got to pay to get on 355. All they ever say is, man, is that 355 great? I can really move, I can really get to places. So, you pay for roads one way or the other. You can pay for them in taxes, or you can have user fees. And I think the future is probably going to be user fees for new roads. But it's just my own little side editorial. I'm going to bring this forward at the executive committee today, and ask the executive committee potentially move a resolution forward, making a request for the study. But I wanted to make sure everybody is kind of aware of it. I do have a draft resolution that I'll make sure everybody gets. It's probably not perfect. They'll probably, my guess is the toll authority may come back and where we would talk about actual scope, because I don't have a scope outside of, let me say, from 57 to 55 or something. Probably have to consult with Jeff Ronaldson also, get his input from our highway department. I did mention it to Don today, and I think he cringed a little bit. Go ahead, Don. Did you want to make a comment?
Like Mr. Brooks, I'm not an advocate of tolls. I can foresee people trying to avoid tolls, and then creates greater congestion on local roads. That's just my own personal view. But I also, just my own view also, is I sense a little bit of displeasure in that I-80 is an IDOT responsibility. It is a freeway, and always has been.
It will remain so, by the way.
And I think where you're driving from, if I read you correctly, is you're saying that IDOT hasn't done anything to address the problems on I-80, and you're looking for some other alternative. I'm not necessarily agree that that's the alternative, but that's what I sense in your voice.
Well,
You seem to be saying, well, we're not getting anything done with IDOT, so you seem to be saying, let's try something else.
Well, what I really want to see if it's even feasible, really. It may not be. But if we can get IDOT, told to do the feasibility study to say whether it's something that could be done, not necessarily will be done, it would be interesting to at least see that it's an alternative. Tom?
I believe they are planning to put toll lanes on I-55 going into Chicago, so there is a precedent for this.
Like I say, I think in some instances, it's the only way new roads are going to get built in certain areas.
I'd be in favor of any way to expand I-80.
Well, I did have Mike once. I'm going to go to Suzanne, and then I'll go to Mike, because they went to Mike once. Suzanne?
Really quick, and you sat in the meeting with us too when we were in NACO and Don. They talked about we were saying about with the managed lanes, and they're also looking at these driverless cars that are going to be coming down into trucks, and they're talking about this as soon as in 10 years. I think actually it could be sooner. So, of going on in social media and Facebook, you're seeing all these petitions are coming in, they're signing, they're asking for, we need some help on 80 and how we're going to do it. And I know Slocum actually on JOL had put, what would it be? What would you think of having toll lanes? And the different options, and meeting with Bob Shellstrom and talking about what could be. Trucks are the #1 concern, I think, on 80. So there could be other options of having that being a truck lane. And we said, oh, well, the trucking industry, how's that going to go? Well, I remember when we talked about Ileana, very much on those meetings, and they made comment that, there's all these rumors, it could be $35 to take that toll. Well, I know talking with truckers, being down in Springfield, and that industry, and talking with the lobbyists down there, they said, if that was something outlandish as $35, it would still be saving money. It'll be hundreds of thousands of dollars of just staying idle on 80 and the dollars being spent. So that's what they're talking about, and having those conversations of where we could do into the future. And that's where everyone is at. And not to mention, a life, a week at one point of these accidents and with these truckers. So it's just a dialogue being open. It's not saying we're going to have to. And because this is going to be on that of legislation, because it is a IDOT responsible, and it's going to have some change. Like, you can't toll. But I know that was also...
I'll make this clear right now.
We're not tolling.
We're
just
I-80, as it exists, is a free road. Now, I'm not, in no way, shape, or form am I suggesting or advocating that I-80 be tolled. What I'm talking about is additional alternative lanes to I-80.
So keep it free.
They run parallel to I-80.
Right.
I might point out when it comes to technology, it is interesting. The 294 up north is getting expanded pretty extensively by the tollway. What's interesting is they're putting in all those technologies on that road for autonomous vehicles and for electric cars. So they'll have electric charge stations along that tollway. And when you look at, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds in this, but it's like when you do look at technologies, and I think we're most likely to see is autonomous trucks first before you see actual vehicles. They'll be like convoys, Toll type lanes might be perfect for them, because especially if they're set up to accommodate the autonomous technologies. Okay, Mike, can you?
Kind of to sum it up, we spent a lot of time and money to create a friendly freight mobility study. That study talks about us looking at managed lanes and toll lanes and all those kinds of things. To start implementing that study, we need more information. If we ask the tollway to give us more information, that just helps us in our implementation. Their information may come back and say tolls make no sense at all, but
it may not be feasible.
Right, but the key is they're going to give us more information than just if a tollway is feasible or not. They'll give us information that we can use for other parts of implementation.
And I also think it tells us then, and it gives us a little bit more leverage with IDOT in the sense of state, in the sense of saying, we don't have any alternatives here, you have to do this. Right. The other alternative the state didn't want us to take forward. Was the Ileana, even though it was a separate system, all the thought was that would be relieved by 80. But we'll see. So anyways, if there's no other questions, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Motion second, all in favor? Aye. Executive committee folks, I will try to make that